In the year 509 BC, the city of Rome stood at the edge of a quiet revolution. The old monarchy had been swept away, its final king driven into exile, and for the first time in its young history, Rome found itself without a crown, without a throne, and without a single man standing above the rest. What began as a desperate reaction to tyranny soon transformed into something far greater, the birth of a new political world, one guided not by a king, but by the people, or at least by those who claimed to represent them. Rome was still a modest city then, a cluster of hills looking out over the Tiber River, its streets narrow, its houses simple, its temples small. But something new glowed beneath the surface. A confidence, a certainty that destiny was shifting. The Romans had thrown off monarchy forever, or so they promised, and replaced it with the res publica, the public thing. Power would no longer sit in a palace. It would be divided like the spokes of a wheel. At the center of this new system were the two consuls. Elected each year, equal in rank and authority, they wore the purple-bordered toga, once reserved for kings, carried the same symbols of power, and commanded the army, but only for a single year, and only so long as they worked together. Their partnership was the first safeguard against tyranny. If one consul grew ambitious, the other could stop him. If one faltered, the other could steady the republic. Beneath them sat the Senate, a council of elders, men experienced in war and politics who advised, debated, and shaped the destiny of the city. And beneath them was the Roman people, not in the modern sense, but in a strictly defined one, citizens, mostly from noble families, whose votes in the assemblies could lift men to office or bring them crashing down. Rome was now governed by a delicate balance of ambition and restraint, tradition and innovation. It was imperfect, unequal, and often contradictory, but for the Romans it was theirs, and that alone filled them with pride. Yet, even in these early days of freedom, the Republic trembled with tension. The patricians, the old aristocratic families, held most of the power. They claimed to protect the laws and traditions, but many among the common people, known as the plebeians, felt that the Republic had simply replaced one ruling class with another. Their struggle would become one of the defining stories of the first centuries of the Republic. But in 509 BC, that struggle was only beginning. A whisper beneath the noise of daily life. Rome's real focus lay elsewhere. Across the river, across the hills, across the frontiers where enemies watched and waited. Without kings to command them, Rome's neighbors believed the city had grown weak. The Latins to the south, the Sabines to the north, and the Etruscans beyond the river all sensed opportunity in Rome's transition. A monarchy was predictable. A new republic, untested and fragile, seemed destined to collapse. But Rome had something no enemy could measure, a fierce sense of identity, forged from myth, pride, and constant survival. They believed they were the heirs of Aeneas, the sons of Mars, a people chosen by the gods to endure. And in the next centuries, as wars erupted across the Italian peninsula, Rome proved again and again that it would not only endure, it would expand. As the first years of the Republic passed, Rome found itself drawn almost continuously to battle. Its consuls marched out each spring with fresh armies, returning in the autumn with stories carved into shields and scars. Victories were celebrated with small triumphs and ceremonies, while defeats were buried beneath renewed determination. War, to the Romans, was not an interruption to peace, it was part of life. But even as Rome fought beyond its walls, storms brewed within. The plebeians demanded protection from debt slavery, fair representation and written laws. They refused to be governed by rules they could not see and judged by men whose power had no limits. Their anger grew until it erupted in one of the most extraordinary moments in Roman history, the first secession of the plebs. One day the plebeians simply walked out of the city. They left their homes, their work and their tools behind, marched to a nearby hill and refused to return until their demands were heard. The Republic could not function without them, the army could not be raised, the fields could not be harvested, the daily life of the city froze. Faced with crisis, the patricians finally listened. The result was the creation of a new office, one that would change Rome forever. The tribunes of the plebs, officials elected by the common people, empowered to defend their rights and even veto decisions of the Senate and consuls. For the first time, the lower classes had a voice, small, fragile, but real. This moment marked the beginning of a long, difficult struggle between Rome's classes, a slow evolution in which the Republic learned to balance privilege and fairness, tradition and adaptation. It would not always succeed, and the tension between patricians and plebeians would echo through the rest of Roman history, but the foundations were laid. By the middle of the 5th century BC, Rome was no longer a vulnerable city with a broken monarchy. It had become something stronger, a society built on shared sacrifice, political innovation, and unrelenting military effort. Its laws became more organized, its institutions more stable, and its armies more disciplined. The 12 Tables, Rome's first written code of law, were created. A monumental step that allowed citizens to know their rights and obligations, not by rumor or memory, but by reading them. As Rome grew internally, it also expanded outward. Small victories turned into larger conquests. Treaties evolved into alliances, and alliances into domination. By the final years of this era, Rome was no longer a minor city among many. It was the rising power of central Italy, feared, respected, and watched with wary eyes by neighbors who sensed what was coming. For the story of Rome between 509 and 264 BC is not the story of an empire, not yet, but the story of how a republic, fragile at birth, forged itself into a machine of destiny. The kings were gone, the people had spoken, and Rome was ready to rise. As Rome settled into its new identity as a republic, the city did not suddenly find peace. Freedom from kings had not erased old rivalries, nor had equality suddenly blossomed between patrician and plebeian. Instead, Rome entered a long period of internal negotiation and external danger, a time when every year seemed to bring a new challenge, every season a new threat, every generation a new test of survival. The heart of the Republic beat loudly in the Forum, where citizens gathered each day to argue, trade, gossip, and debate. Bronze tablets clinked under the sun, merchants shouted over the noise of chariots, and senators in white-bordered togas strode across the open square with a seriousness that seemed to say the fate of the world rested on their next vote. In truth, for Rome, every decision mattered. The Republic was still fragile, like wet clay not yet hardened, and the slightest pressure could reshape its future. But life in Rome was not defined only by politics. It was defined also by fear, the fear that the city might fall before it could rise. Surrounding nations looked upon Rome with suspicion. The expulsion of the kings did not erase old grudges, it invited new ones. And so, almost every year, the consuls marched out with their legions to fight small but relentless wars. The first enemies to challenge the young republic were the Latins, Rome's closest cultural kin. They shared similar gods, similar customs, and similar languages, but not a similar desire for unity. The Latin cities feared Rome's ambition, and at times sought to contain it. Rome, meanwhile, feared Latin coalitions and constantly maneuvered to prevent them. The struggle was not one great war, but a series of skirmishes, raids, and uneasy treaties. Sometimes Rome fought alone, sometimes it allied with one Latin city to weaken another. Diplomacy and warfare wove together like threads on a loom, creating a tapestry of shifting alliances. Over time, however, a quiet truth emerged. Rome fought more fiercely than its neighbors. Victories did not bring arrogance, they brought urgency. Each success convinced Rome that its survival depended on being stronger tomorrow than it was today. Each defeat taught it how quickly weakness could be exploited. This unending pressure shaped the Roman character, stubborn, disciplined, determined, and unshakable. To the north lay a greater danger, the Etruscans, a powerful and sophisticated civilization whose cities towered over the landscape. They possessed wealth, engineering skills, and political influence far beyond Rome's early reach. The last kings of Rome had been Etruscan, and even though monarchy was gone, the shadow of Etruscan power still stretched across the Tiber. Early in the Republic's life, war erupted with the Etruscan city of Veii, one of Rome's fiercest rivals. The battles were brutal, fought across farmland and forest, with neither side willing to retreat. Veii represented everything Rome feared, a strong enemy just beyond the horizon, wealthy and ambitious, ready to strike whenever the Republic showed weakness. But Rome did not collapse, it endured, and slowly through persistence and sacrifice, it began to push back. The Romans learned the terrain, adapted their strategies, and hardened their legions. They were still far from dominating the region, but they were proving that the Republic could fight enemies far more powerful than itself and survive. While the armies marched outward, another battle raged within the city walls, a battle not of swords but of voices. The plebeians continued to fight for political rights and protections. Their grievances were not trivial. Many were trapped in debt, unable to pay interest on loans, forced into servitude or threatened with slavery. Others felt the sting of exclusion, no access to high office, no involvement in major decisions, no meaningful role in shaping the city they bled to defend. The tribunes of the plebs had been established, but they were only the beginning. Their veto power gave the plebeians a shield but not a sword, and so year after year the struggle continued. One of the most important victories came with the creation of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written code of law. It was a radical idea. Instead of laws being held in the minds of patrician judges, who could interpret them however they pleased, the laws would now be engraved in bronze and displayed for all to see. Children learned them in school, merchants quoted them in disputes, farmers invoked them when arguing over land boundaries. For the first time, Rome had a legal foundation that did not shift with the wind of political influence. It was not perfect, many laws were harsh, others outdated, but for Rome it was a step toward equality. Even as Rome strengthened from within, new dangers emerged from the hills and valleys of central Italy. The Volsci and Aequi, two tribal peoples, fought Rome in a series of long and exhausting wars. Their tactics were different from Rome's usual enemies. Swift raids, ambushes, mountain warfare, attacks on supply lines. These conflicts lasted for generations. No single battle decided their outcome. Instead, Rome prevailed through persistence. Consul after consul marched against them, pushing their borders back inch by inch. The Romans built roads, fortified outposts, and created a network of alliances that slowly strangled their enemies' ability to resist. By the end of the 5th century BC, Rome had secured much of its immediate surroundings. It was no longer just a city, it was becoming a regional force. Life in early Republican Rome was not easy, and the city was often hungry, always busy, constantly preparing for the next campaign season. But hardship forged unity. Citizens came to see themselves not just as individuals or members of families, but as participants in a larger destiny. Each victory added a brick to Rome's growing confidence. Each defeat carved deeper discipline into its soldiers. Every political reform, however small, strengthened the Republic's foundations. By the dawn of the 4th century BC, Rome stood taller than ever before, but just beyond the horizon, the ground trembled. A new threat, greater than any the Republic had faced, was marching toward the city. A force that would test Rome's resilience like never before. The Gauls were coming. By the early 4th century BC, Rome had become a determined and stubborn force in central Italy. It had survived endless border wars, internal struggles, and political turmoil. It had expanded its alliances and strengthened its legions. But destiny, as always, had its own plans. Far beyond Rome's horizons, a restless people were on the move. Tall warriors from the north, fierce and unpredictable, drawn southward by stories of fertile lands and rich cities. These were the Gauls, a collection of Celtic tribes whose power and ferocity shook the Italian peninsula like a distant thunderstorm rolling closer every year. At first they were only rumors, strange tales carried by merchants and travelers, stories of warriors with long hair, bright shields, thunderous battle cries. Stories of cities plundered, fields burned, armies shattered. Rome listened, uncertain. These tales sounded exaggerated, almost mythic, but they were not. In 390 BC, or 387 BC, by some traditions, the Gauls arrived at Rome's doorstep. It began near a small river north of the city, the Allia, where Roman forces confronted the Gallic invaders. The Romans were confident. They were fighting as they always had, with discipline and steady ranks. But the Gauls did not fight like Rome's familiar enemies. They charged with overwhelming speed and fury, breaking the Roman line with terrifying ease. Panic spread, the Roman army collapsed, soldiers fled in chaos, some rushing back toward the city, others scattering into the countryside. What happened next became one of the darkest days in Roman memory. The Gauls marched on Rome. The city was defended only by those who refused to flee. A handful of senators, priests, and young men who climbed the Capitoline Hill and fortified themselves behind makeshift barricades. The rest of Rome, abandoned and undefended, fell almost immediately. The Gauls stormed the streets, looted the houses, and set fire to buildings that had stood since the days of the kings. Flames rose into the sky. and smoke blanketed the city like a funeral shroud. Rome, the proud republic, the ambitious young power of Italy, seemed destined to vanish in a single day. Yet even amidst destruction, the Romans clung stubbornly to survival. The defenders on the Capitoline Hill held out for months, resisting every attack. The Gauls grew impatient, then frustrated. They demanded ransom, a massive sum of gold in exchange for leaving the city. According to legend, when the Romans complained that the Gauls were using heavier weights to measure the gold, the Gallic leader Brennus threw his sword onto the scale and shouted, "Vae victis, woe to the conquered." The humiliation stung Rome deeply. The city paid a ransom, the Gauls withdrew, and the Romans descended from the Capitoline to find their homes in ashes. But Rome did not die. In fact, something remarkable happened. Instead of despair, anger took hold. Instead of mourning, determination. The Romans chose not to abandon their ruined city, nor to move to other settlements, even though some suggested it. They would rebuild, not as they had been, but stronger. Streets were cleared, houses rebuilt from scratch, temples restored. The walls were fortified, expanded, strengthened with new stone and engineering improvements. Every Roman, rich or poor, worked side by side in the reconstruction. The destruction had unified them more than any law or victory ever could. Rome's institutions also hardened. The trauma of the sack taught the Republic that survival demanded preparation, discipline, and unbreakable unity. The Senate reformed the military procedures, improved supply lines, reorganized the legions, and began investing in military infrastructure, like roads and fortifications. Rome would never again be caught off guard. As the city rose from its ashes, its neighbors watched with surprise and concern. Many expected Rome to collapse after the Gallic sack. Instead, it returned to the battlefield with even greater ferocity. The next decade saw wars against the Etruscans, the Volsci, and the Aequi, and Latin cities that had once been Rome's equals. But Rome was changing. Its armies were larger, its strategies more refined, its alliances more calculated. The Romans no longer fought simply to survive. They fought to secure their future, to make sure no enemy could ever again burn their city. One of the most important victories came in the war against Veii, Rome's old rival. This conflict, long and difficult, ended with Rome capturing the city, a turning point that doubled Rome's territory and opened new opportunities for settlement and expansion. The Romans also began to perfect a new political tool, the Latin alliance system, a network of treaties and obligations that bound neighboring communities to Rome. These allies supplied troops, paid taxes, and supported Rome in war, expanding the Republic's reach without direct conquest. But the greatest challenge still lay ahead. A mountainous people to the south known as the Samnites, fierce warriors who fought with a passion unmatched by any foes Rome had encountered before. They were Rome's equal in discipline, unmatched in bravery, and perfectly suited to the rugged terrain of central Italy. If Rome wanted to control the peninsula, it would have to defeat the Samnites, and these wars, stretching across decades, would define the next phase of the Republic's rise. For now, however, Rome stood at a crucial crossroads. It had survived annihilation, it had rebuilt itself from ruins, it had reformed its laws, strengthened its armies, and emerged from one of its darkest ages more united than ever. The scars of the Gallic sack remained, but they were no longer signs of weakness. They were reminders of how close Rome had come to falling, and how far it had climbed since. And in the shadows of the Apennine Mountains, the Samnites were watching. A collision was coming, one that would reshape Italy forever. After the ashes of the Gallic sack settled, Rome found itself hardened, unified and hungry for security. The memory of flames licking the city's walls had carved a silent promise into every Roman heart. Never again. Never again would they allow an enemy to walk into their streets. Never again would they watch helplessly as their homes were burned. Survival was no longer enough. Rome needed dominance. And in the rugged mountains to the south lived a people who would put that determination to the test. The Samnites. They were not like Rome's previous enemies. The Samnites were warriors of the highlands. Swift, bold, relentless. They lived in rough terrain carved with valleys and steep twisting paths where disciplined Roman formations struggled. Their warriors fought with agility, using the land as their ally. And most importantly, they shared Rome's ambition. The collision between Rome and Samnium was not one war, but three, fought across half a century, each more brutal than the last. These wars did not just test Rome, they transformed it. The first conflict began over a small spark, a dispute over territory in the fertile region of Campania. The wealthy city of Capua, threatened by Samnite advances, turned to Rome for protection. Rome agreed, sensing both opportunity and danger. The Samnites fought fiercely, but Rome's legions, fresh from decades of reform and rebuilding, proved stronger than expected. The war ended quickly, with Rome securing its influence over Campania. But victory revealed a deeper truth. Rome and Samnium were now too close, too powerful and too ambitious to coexist peacefully. A larger storm brewed just beyond the horizon. Before the Samnites struck again, another challenge emerged. Rome's own Latin allies, long uneasy with the Republic's growing authority, they demanded equal power, equal say, equal leadership. Rome refused. A war erupted. The Latins fought bravely. They had once been Rome's equals, but now Rome stood too strong. When the conflict ended, Rome dissolved the old Latin League and replaced it with a new system. Each community tied directly to Rome, not to each other. This model would become the backbone of Roman expansion. Local autonomy, combined with Roman oversight, in exchange for loyalty and soldiers. A brilliant, subtle form of empire building, one that the Samnites would soon learn to fear. The Second War was the longest and most painful. It taught Rome humility, discipline, and the cost of underestimating an enemy. At the heart of this conflict was a deeply humiliating event, the Battle of the Caudine Forks. The Romans marched confidently into a narrow mountain pass, unaware that the Samnites had blocked both exits. Trapped between steep walls with no room for formation, the entire Roman army realized too late that they had been outmaneuvered. With no escape, no food, and no hope of rescue, the Roman commander surrendered. The Samnite general Gaius Pontius did not kill them. Instead, he demanded a punishment worse than death. The Roman army would pass under a yoke. 2 spears held aloft with a third placed across them, symbolizing absolute defeat and submission. The legions walked beneath it in silence, ashamed, humiliated. Rome had never known such disgrace. The Caudine humiliation burned deeper than the Gallic sack. This wasn't an invasion, this was a military embarrassment. Rome's pride was shattered. But Roman pride was never passive. Wounded pride became iron determination. They reformed, improved their scouting, strengthened their logistics, adjusted their formations to mountainous combat, fortified roads for faster troop movement. Most importantly, Rome learned a lesson that would define its future. Rome does not give up, ever. The war raged on, and slowly, painfully, Rome regained lost ground. Victory came not from one battle, but from persistence, conquering towns, building alliances, and refusing to accept defeat. By the war's end, the Samnites understood that Rome was not a city that could be beaten once and left to kneel. Rome was a city that rose every time it fell. The final war erupted when Rome pushed deeper into central Italy. This time the Samnites rallied allies across the region, Etruscans, Umbrians, and Gauls, forming one of the largest coalitions Rome had ever faced. For the first time since the Republic began, the entire Italian peninsula seemed poised against them. This decisive battle became legend. 2 Roman consuls, Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus and Publius Decius Mus, led the Republic's forces. The fighting was fierce, chaotic, brutal, fought under the glare of the hot Italian sun. At a critical moment, one consul, Decius Mus, performed a ritual of self-sacrifice known as devotio. Calling upon the gods, he charged into the enemy lines alone, offering his life in exchange for Rome's victory. Inspired, the Roman legions surged forward. The coalition broke. The Samnites fell back. Victory belonged to Rome. The final years of the war saw Rome crush resistance across the mountains. Samnite courage was unbroken, but their strength was spent. By 290 BC, the Samnites were defeated. Rome controlled their lands, their roads, their alliances. The entire center of Italy now belonged to the Republic. The Samnite Wars did not simply expand Rome, they reshaped it. Rome learned to build long military roads, to create permanent alliances, to move armies faster and farther, to fight in diverse terrain, to adapt, endure, and innovate. Rome emerged from these wars no longer a city struggling for survival, but a rising power capable of directing the fate of an entire region. By 290 BC, Rome dominated central Italy. The south, the wealthy Greek cities and the rising power of Carthage, awaited in the next chapter. And so, with the Samnites defeated, the Republic turned its eyes toward new horizons. By the dawn of the 3rd century BC, Rome stood atop the central Italian hills as a power transformed. The Samnite Wars had hardened the Republic like iron in a forge. What had been a city among many was now a dominant force, surrounded by allies bound by treaty and obligation. The roads Rome built during the long struggle cut across valleys and mountains, carrying legions swiftly to wherever danger appeared. The Republic had become a machine, disciplined, adaptable, and relentless. But Rome's ambition did not pause. Now that the center of the peninsula lay beneath its influence, the Republic's gaze drifted southward, toward lands rich with commerce, culture, and ancient cities. The next great chapter in Rome's rise would bring it face to face with Greeks, with philosophers, warriors, and kings, and with a man whose name would echo through history. His name was Pyrrhus of Epirus. Before Pyrrhus arrived, Rome spent the first years after the Samnite Wars consolidating its control. New colonies were founded in strategic locations, each one a Roman outpost secured by walls, veterans, and loyal citizens. Rome's alliances were deepened, with Italian communities integrated into a complex network of obligations. Each ally provided troops, a unique system that allowed Rome to field larger armies than any single city-state could imagine. This web of allies would become Rome's greatest advantage in the centuries to come. Meanwhile, Rome conquered or absorbed other neighbors. The Sabines were granted citizenship. The Etruscans, weakened by wars of conflict with Rome and other enemies, gradually fell under Roman influence. In the south, Rome confronted the ambitions of Lucanians and Bruttians, fierce tribes who sought to dominate the region. But one city resisted Roman power with fierce independence: the wealthy Greek colony of Tarentum. Tarentum was proud, prosperous, and deeply connected to the Greek world. Its citizens saw Rome as a barbaric intruder, a northern upstart marching dangerously close to their sphere of influence. When a Roman fleet sailed into waters Tarentum claimed as its own, the Tarentines attacked, sinking Roman ships and insulting the Republic's envoys. It was a grave mistake. Rome prepared for war. Tarentum, realizing the danger, sent for help to a king known for his brilliance, his ambition, and his dreams of empire. Pyrrhus, king of Epirus and kinsman of Alexander the Great, was a warrior of legendary skill. He saw in Italy not just a battlefield but a stage upon which he could build his own empire. When he arrived, he did not come alone. He brought 20 war elephants, never before seen in Italy. A veteran army trained in the Macedonian phalanx, cavalry skilled in the tactics of Alexander's successors, and a burning desire for conquest. For Rome, this was a new kind of war, a clash not with tribal warriors or local rivals, but with the elite armies of the Greek world. It was as if the legacy of Alexander had marched into Italy. The first battle came near the river Siris, at a place called Heraclea. The Roman legions, confident after decades of victory, marched forward in their manipular formation. Pyrrhus countered with the long spears of the phalanx, a wall of iron bristling with deadly points. The fighting was brutal and evenly matched, until Pyrrhus unleashed his secret weapon. The war elephants thundered forward, crashing into the Roman cavalry. Horses panicked, men scattered. The Romans had never seen such creatures before, and confusion spread through their ranks. Though Rome fought valiantly, Pyrrhus won the day. But victory came at a cost. So many of his elite troops died that Pyrrhus remarked, "Another victory like this and I am undone." The first Pyrrhic victory. The next year the armies clashed again. The Romans adapted their tactics, using lighter troops to harass the elephants, building spiked wagons to break their charge. The battle lasted 2 days, fierce and exhausting. Pyrrhus won again, but barely. His casualties were heavy, irreplaceable. Roman losses, though severe, could be replenished by the vast Allied network. Rome, for the first time in this era, showed the world its unique strength. Rome could lose battles and still win the war. The rest of Italy was watching. Greek cities wavered. Tribes hesitated. Rome had not collapsed before the might of Alexander's successor. It had endured. Seeing that Rome would not be crushed easily, Pyrrhus turned to Sicily, hoping to carve out a new kingdom there, but the Sicilian Greeks grew weary of his harsh rule. When Pyrrhus returned to Italy years later, his army was smaller, weaker, and tired of endless campaigning. In 275 BC, the final confrontation occurred at Beneventum. This time the Romans stood firm. Their cavalry harassed the elephants, their infantry pressed forward, and Pyrrhus' army faltered. Defeated and disillusioned, Pyrrhus withdrew. Soon after, he left Italy entirely. Rome had survived. And with his departure, Tarentum surrendered. The last major Greek city in Italy bowed to Roman authority. By 264 BC, Rome dominated the entire Italian peninsula. For the first time in its history, the Republic stood unchallenged at home. It had conquered mountain tribes, humbled the Latins, subdued the Samnites, defeated the Etruscans, and outlasted the armies of a Greek king. Italy was united, not through fear alone, but through Rome's unique system of alliances, colonies, and shared obligations. Hundreds of communities were now tied to Rome by law, loyalty, and war. But with unity came new opportunities and new dangers. Just across the narrow waters of the Strait of Messina lay the island of Sicily, rich, fertile, and contested by powerful forces. One of them was Carthage, a maritime empire whose fleets ruled the western Mediterranean. The other was a network of Sicilian Greek cities still seeking protection and independence. It was only a matter of time before Rome was drawn into this conflict, a conflict that would erupt into the First Punic War, the Republic's first true contest with a superpower. Rome had mastered Italy. Now it would test its strength across the sea.